When Keanu Reeves steps into a quiet, tucked-away restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, he's just looking for a peaceful escape. The night air is thick with the aroma of spices and freshly baked bread. The cobblestone streets echo faint strains of blues music, whispering stories of the city's past. Charleston is alive, mysterious and filled with pockets of solitude. It's exactly what Keanu wants, a chance to be anonymous, to observe without being observed. But as he takes a seat at an unassuming corner table, he has no idea that this night will mark the beginning of something far more profound. The restaurant is unlike any of the flashy eateries on the main thoroughfares. Its entrance is subtle, its interior warm and inviting. Wooden tables, worn smooth from years of use, rest beneath shelves crammed with dusty wine bottles. Candlelight flickers gently, casting golden hues across the rustic walls. The air smells of slow-cooked southern dishes, rich and tantalizing. Keanu is greeted by a middle-aged waiter who offers a friendly smile as he hands over a menu. There's no flicker of recognition in the waiter's eyes, and Keanu finds solace in that. A simple plate of shrimp and grits, a glass of wine. He needs nothing more tonight. He isn't seeking glamour or indulgence, only a moment of stillness. As he sips his drink, he lets his eyes drift over the room. Couples lean in close, their conversations muted. A group of friends share laughter and plates, the kind of camaraderie that comes from long-standing connections. At one table, a lone woman jots notes in a well-worn notebook, lost in her own world. The hum of quiet activity soothes Keanu, giving him the kind of peace he rarely finds in his whirlwind life. But then, something changes. At first, it's barely noticeable. A faint melody, almost like a whisper, cutting through the gentle clinking of silverware. Keanu's attention sharpens. His gaze shifts to a modest stage in the far corner of the room. It's nothing extravagant, just a simple stool, a microphone, and an old speaker. And standing there, gripping the microphone with both hands, is a girl who can't be more than 13. There's something magnetic about her presence, something that makes Keanu sit a little straighter. Her eyes are closed, her brow slightly furrowed, as though she's holding on to an emotion she can barely contain. Then she starts to sing. Her voice fills the room, pure, haunting, and raw. It carries a depth of emotion that doesn't belong to someone so young. The room falls silent. Conversations stop mid-sentence, forks rest idle on plates, and all that remains is her voice weaving its way through the air. Every note she sings feels like a story, an intimate glimpse into a pain too heavy for her small frame. It's not just beautiful, it's personal. Keanu feels a shiver run through him. He's heard incredible singers before, watched performances that moved entire audiences. But this feels different. This feels real. It's as if her song is a cry for help, and Keanu can't look away. When the final note fades, the silence lingers. Then, slowly, applause ripples through the room. It starts tentatively, then grows louder, more heartfelt. The girl opens her eyes and offers a small, shy smile. She steps off the stage and moves carefully through the tables, a donation box in her hands. Keanu watches her, his thoughts racing. That voice, that emotion, it wasn't just a performance, it was a plea. But for what? Even as the restaurant gradually returns to its usual rhythm, Keanu's mind remains fixed on her. Who is she? And why does her voice carry so much sorrow? When she reaches his table, Keanu sees the exhaustion in her bright, intelligent eyes. She doesn't speak at first, just holds out the donation box. Up close, he can sense her weariness, the weight she carries. Keanu glances at the box, then back at her, and in that moment, he realizes that her song wasn't just a momentary distraction. It was a window into a story far bigger than he could have anticipated. As he slips a folded bill into the box, he finally speaks. "What's your name?" he asks softly. "Anna," she replies, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu nods. "You have a beautiful voice." She offers a faint smile, murmurs a thank you, and moves to the next table. But Keanu isn't done. He flags down the waiter, his curiosity too strong to ignore. "Who is she?" Keanu asks, his voice low. The waiter glances toward Anna and sighs. "That's Anna. She comes here most nights to sing." Keanu studies her as she moves through the room. "Why doesn't she get paid?" "She sings for donations," the waiter explains. "She's saving up for her grandfather's surgery." The weight of those words hits Keanu harder than he expected. He watches as Anna accepts crumpled bills and loose change, her movements careful, her demeanor quietly determined. There's no arrogance in her approach, no sense of entitlement, just a quiet gratitude for whatever people can spare. "She's been coming here for months," the waiter continues. "Her grandfather was a craftsman, a really talented one, restored a lot of old buildings in town, but he's sick now, and they can't afford the surgery." Keanu exhales slowly, staring at his glass. He knows that kind of pain all too well, the helpless feeling of watching someone you care about struggle, wanting desperately to help, but not knowing how. The pieces begin to fall into place. Anna isn't just a girl with a stunning voice. She's a child carrying a burden far too heavy for her years. And her grandfather, an artist in his own right, is trapped by pride and circumstance. As Keanu sits in the soft candlelight, the world around him fades into the background, the clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation. It all becomes a distant hum. His focus is on Anna and the story she's inadvertently shared through her music. He can't shake the image of her standing on that stage, her voice filled with an ache that didn't belong to someone so young. Across the room, Anna continues her rounds, stopping at each table, accepting whatever people can give. Some offer generously, pressing folded bills into her hands. Others give only spare change, barely looking her in the eye. But Anna takes it all with quiet dignity, thanking each person softly before moving on. When she reaches the end of the room, her collection box is only partially filled. It's not enough. It's never enough. Keanu's mind races. He has the means to help, more than enough to make a difference. But it's not just about money. It's about the connection, the humanity in her song, the rawness that broke through his defenses. He can't walk away from that. As the evening wears on, Keanu remains at his table, his thoughts turning over again and again. He's not just moved by her voice. He's compelled by her strength. She's a child, and yet she's doing everything she can to fight for her family. Her music is more than entertainment. It's a lifeline. Keanu knows what it's like to carry the weight of expectation, to feel the pressure of responsibility. And in Anna, he sees a kindred spirit, someone who's learned too early that life doesn't always wait for you to be ready. As the night deepens, Keanu makes a decision. This isn't just another quiet evening. It's the start of a new story, one that will take him down a path he never expected, toward a purpose he hadn't even realized he was searching for. Keanu Reeves placed the $100 bill into the donation box with a quiet decisiveness, his expression calm yet thoughtful. Across from him, the young girl, Anna, stared at the money in astonishment. "Sir, this is too much," she said hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly, no longer the strong, commanding tone that had filled the restaurant just moments ago. Keanu offered her a gentle smile. "Consider it a tip," he replied softly. Anna's gaze shifted from the bill to his face, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered after a pause, her words barely audible, but deeply sincere. Keanu nodded. The girl's reaction stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite place. He hesitated before asking, "How's your grandfather doing?" Anna's surprise was evident. Most people never asked. They simply dropped a few bills into the box and went about their evenings. She bit her lower lip and clutched the donation box a little tighter, as if it were a lifeline. "He's doing his best," she said carefully. But Keanu could hear the unspoken fears in her voice. Her hesitance, her carefully chosen words, they revealed the truth she didn't want to admit. She was afraid. afraid that no matter how many songs she sang, how many donations she gathered, it wouldn't be enough. Keanu met her gaze with a quiet understanding. He didn't need her to explain further. He knew that fear, that uncertainty. He had lived it himself, in a different way. His own past echoed in the weight she carried, the burdens she struggled with alone. As Anna walked away, Keanu's eyes followed her. She moved through the restaurant with an air of quiet determination, but the weight on her young shoulders was undeniable. She was so young, yet her movements, her demeanor, spoke of someone who had faced more than her share of challenges. She carried herself with the kind of resilience that only came from necessity, from being forced to grow up too soon. Keanu sat silently, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. He replayed her performance in his mind. Her voice hadn't just been beautiful, it had been raw, filled with a depth of emotion that didn't belong to someone her age. It wasn't just about the money, it was about holding on, about fighting to keep someone she loved alive and well, even if it meant sacrificing pieces of herself along the way. And Keanu couldn't ignore that. It stayed with him, as vivid as the candlelight flickering across the wooden tables. When Anna passed by his table again, he raised a hand, motioning her over. Anna. She paused, clearly surprised. Most people didn't bother remembering her name after she sang. They dropped their money in the box and moved on, barely acknowledging her beyond a polite thank you. But this man was different. He was looking at her. Not just her voice, not just her talent, but at her, the person behind it all. She hesitated before stepping closer. "Yes?" she asked quietly. Keanu motioned to the empty chair across from him. "Would you sit with me for a minute?" Anna glanced around, as if worried she might get in trouble for stopping. But there was something in Keanu's steady gaze, in the way he didn't pressure her, that made her pull out the chair and sit. She balanced the donation box on her lap, her fingers curling around its edges. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Keanu gave her the space to breathe, the silence to gather her thoughts. Finally, he asked, "How's your grandfather really doing?" Anna's hands tightened on the box, her knuckles turning white. "I told you, he's doing his best," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Keanu didn't break eye contact. He just waited, his silence encouraging her to say what she needed to. Her smile faltered. She let out a shaky breath, looking down at the box. "He's getting worse," she admitted in a whisper, her voice almost lost amid the low murmur of the restaurant. Keanu nodded slowly, already suspecting as much. Anna swallowed hard. "He keeps saying he doesn't want to be a burden." Her small hands clenched into fists. "He doesn't want me doing this, singing for money, but what else can I do?" Her voice cracked, betraying the weight of her desperation. Keanu felt a knot tighten in his chest. He knew that feeling all too well. The helplessness of watching someone you loved fade, of wanting to help but feeling powerless to change the outcome. Yet in Anna's eyes, he saw something else. A quiet determination, a refusal to give up even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Anna wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by her display of emotion. "Sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't usually talk about this." Keanu shook his head. "You don't have to apologize." Anna looked at him closely, as if trying to understand why he cared. You understand, don't you?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said simply. He didn't need to explain further. Some kinds of pain didn't require explanation. After a moment, Anna straightened in her chair, pushing the emotions back down. "I just have to keep going," she said quietly. "I have to make sure we have enough." Keanu studied her. This young girl was carrying more than anyone her age should have to bear. She was a fighter, a warrior in disguise, navigating a battle that would be overwhelming even for most adults. A part of Keanu wanted to take out his wallet right then and there and give her enough money to cover every bill, every expense, so she'd never have to worry again. But he knew that wasn't the answer. Her grandfather was proud, and she was fighting for more than his health. She was fighting for his dignity. Keanu knew he couldn't solve this for her, not in the way he wanted to, But that didn't mean he couldn't help in another way. As Anna stood up, preparing to continue collecting donations, Keanu felt a quiet determination settle over him. Something about her voice, her courage stayed with him, and he knew this wasn't the end of the story. The next morning, Keanu stood outside a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building wasn't in disrepair, but it had clearly seen better days. Its weathered walls and rusted railings hinted at a time when the neighborhood had been more vibrant, more hopeful. Keanu adjusted the strap of the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he had to try. Anna had mentioned her grandfather lived in apartment 3B. As Keanu climbed the stairs, his thoughts lingered on the man he was about to meet. A craftsman, proud and stubborn, who had built a life with his own hands only to find himself struggling now. Those hands unable to do what they once could. Keanu knocked on the door. After a brief silence, slow footsteps approached. The door creaked open, and a man in his late 70s appeared. His frame was thin but strong, his posture slightly hunched. Salt and pepper hair framed a face lined with age, and sharp eyes studied Keanu with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. Keanu smiled gently. "Hi, I'm Keanu. I heard about your work, your restorations. I wanted to meet you." The man frowned, his brow furrowing. "My work?" he echoed, puzzled. Keanu nodded. "Restoring history. That's an art." The man rubbed his chin, his expression softening slightly. "That was a long time ago," he said, almost to himself. "But you still remember it," Keanu replied, his tone even, encouraging. There was a pause before the man sighed, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was modest but tidy, filled with well-worn wooden furniture and faded photographs. Keanu's gaze wandered to a workbench in the corner, where unfinished wooden pieces sat alongside tools arranged in careful disarray. Even now, it seemed, the man hadn't completely stopped creating. "Coffee?" the man asked, still eyeing Keanu with caution. "Sure," Keanu replied. As the coffee brewed, the man leaned against the counter, his sharp eyes never leaving Keanu. "What's a man like you doing here?" he asked bluntly. Keanu offered a faint smile. "I met Anna last night." Hardened. "She shouldn't be singing in those places," he muttered, a trace of guilt lingering in his voice. "She should be out living her life, not like this." His words faltered, and he shook his head as if trying to dispel a thought he'd rather not acknowledge. "I never wanted this for her." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the edge of the small kitchen table. "She's doing it because she loves you," he said quietly. Giovanni scoffed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "That's exactly the problem." He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip, sighing heavily. "She thinks if she just works hard enough, she can make everything right again, that she can fight the inevitable." His voice lowered, and for a moment he looked more vulnerable than he intended to. "But I won't let her waste her life trying to save me." Keanu's gaze softened. "You taught her to be strong," he said, his words measured. Giovanni glanced up at him. Something stirred behind the old man's tired eyes. Recognition, maybe even pride, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Strength isn't about fighting alone," Keanu continued. "Sometimes it's about knowing when to let someone fight beside you." Giovanni's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. The room fell quiet, except for the faint sounds of the street outside. "I don't take handouts," Giovanni said finally, his voice steady but firm. Keanu offered a faint smile and reached down to pull a small wooden box from his canvas bag. "Good," he replied, placing the box on the table. "Because I didn't bring one." Giovanni frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the box. "What's this?" "Something I found in an old shop," Keanu said. "It reminded me of your work." Hesitant, Giovanni reached out. His rough fingers brushed over the intricate carvings on the box's surface. The wood felt smooth beneath his fingertips, the patterns familiar. For a long moment, Giovanni didn't say anything. He just held the box, his expression shifting as memories he hadn't touched in years seemed to resurface. Keanu watched him closely. "You're an artist," he said softly, "and the world still needs artists." Giovanni's eyes rose to meet Keanu's. They looked tired, decades of struggle and worry etched into them, but for the first time in what felt like years, they also held a spark of something else, hope. His hands, which had felt too weak for too long, suddenly felt capable again. When Keanu left the apartment, he had the beginning of a plan forming in his mind. Giovanni's pride was unyielding. He would never accept a handout. But Keanu wasn't trying to offer charity. He wanted to restore what the man had built, to bring back the spark that had been dulled by time and hardship. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about purpose. Keanu pulled out his phone as he walked down the street. He scrolled through his contacts and made a call. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Didn't expect to hear from you in New Orleans," the person said. Keanu smiled faintly. "I've got a proposition for you." 2 days later, Keanu stood inside the historic Orpheum Theater. It was one of the oldest venues in the city, a grand space that had once hosted legendary performers. That night, it would host Anna. Keanu had arranged everything quietly, without any publicity or fanfare. There were no reporters, no announcements, just one night that might change everything. The theater's owner had agreed without hesitation. "I can fill the seats," he had said confidently. "Just make sure she shows up and sings." That was the delicate part. Anna wouldn't accept help if she thought it was charity, and Giovanni would refuse outright if it seemed like a gift. But Keanu knew how to approach them, how to frame this night not as a handout, but as an opportunity to let the world see what Anna could do and what Giovanni still had to offer. That evening, Keanu waited outside the restaurant where Anna usually sang. When she stepped out, holding her donation box, she looked surprised to see him. "You came back," she said, her voice soft but curious. Keanu nodded. "I have a question for you." Anna tilted her head slightly, her expression cautious. "What is it?" "If you could sing for people who came just to hear you," he asked, "would you?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not a real performer. I just sing because I have to." Keanu shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You sing because it's in you." Anna bit her lip, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She had spent so long singing out of necessity that she had forgotten what it meant to sing purely for the joy of it. Keanu reached into his pocket and handed her a small ticket. "For tomorrow night," he said. "Just come and watch. That's all I'm asking." Anna took the ticket, studying it carefully. "Why?" she asked, still confused. Keanu smiled. "Because I think you'll find something there you didn't expect." The following morning, Keanu returned to Giovanni's apartment. The old man glanced up as Keanu entered. "Back again," he muttered. Keanu smirked slightly. "I don't give up that easily." He placed a piece of wood on the table in front of Giovanni. The older man frowned, his hand hovering over the grain. "What's this?" "A commission," Keanu explained. "A theater downtown needs its original woodwork restored. They're looking for real craftsmanship." Giovanni scoffed quietly. "And you thought of me?" Keanu shrugged. "Your reputation speaks for itself." Giovanni ran his fingers over the wood, the familiar textures awakening a part of him that he thought was long gone. Keanu could see it, something shifting in the old man's expression, something almost imperceptible but unmistakable. "Come see the place," Keanu said. "If you don't want to do it, you can walk away." Finally, Giovanni sighed and nodded. "Fine, I'll take a look." That evening, the Orpheum Theater was alive with energy. Locals, musicians, and strangers filled the seats, drawn by whispers of a girl with a voice that could stop time. Keanu stood backstage, watching the crowd settle in. Anna arrived with Giovanni, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur of the theater. "This is..." She trailed off, overwhelmed. Keanu smiled. Something different. Giovanni's attention turned to the wooden paneling along the theater walls. He reached out and touched it, his fingers brushing over the smooth, restored surface. "Someone's already done work here," he muttered. "They have," Keanu said, "but they need someone to maintain it, someone who knows what they're doing." Giovanni turned to Keanu, his expression skeptical. "You serious?" "Completely." For a moment, Giovanni seemed to weigh his options. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe this was a chance, an opportunity to reclaim his craft, his purpose. Meanwhile, Anna stared at the stage, her nerves beginning to show. The theater's owner approached her with a warm smile. "You must be Anna," he said. She nodded, still overwhelmed. "Yes. We'd love to hear you sing tonight," he said. Her eyes widened. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The owner gestured toward the audience. "They came here to hear you." Anna froze, panic flickering in her expression. "I can't do this," she murmured. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about money," he said softly. "Then what is it about?" Anna asked, her voice barely audible. Keanu smiled. "It's about you." The lights dimmed, and a stillness settled over the audience. Anna moved toward the microphone, her heart racing, her hands trembling. She had never been so terrified, yet for the first time in years, she had never felt more alive. The stage seemed larger than life, its grandeur overwhelming her senses. The blinding lights made it impossible to see the audience clearly, but she could feel their presence, hundreds of expectant eyes waiting, watching. She paused, her breath shallow. Singing had always been about survival for her, about doing whatever she could to help her grandfather. But this was different. Her chest tightened as she glanced toward Keanu, her eyes wide with panic. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Keanu knelt beside her, his voice calm and steady. "You don't have to," he said gently. "But if you don't, you might always wonder, what if?" Anna's breath caught in her throat. His words sank in. This wasn't about earning donations. It wasn't about money at all. It was about believing in herself. The theater fell into complete silence as Keanu moved to the grand piano. His fingers pressed softly into the keys, and a gentle melody filled the space. It wasn't a complex piece. It felt familiar, like home. Anna closed her eyes, grounding herself in the sound. Then she began to sing. At first, her voice was quiet, uncertain. The notes wavered, but as she let herself sink into the music, something shifted. She stopped holding back. The melody swelled, her voice gaining strength. The hesitance melted away, replaced by a richness born from years of bottled emotion. Each note carried everything she had felt and never said. It was no longer just a performance. It was her truth. The audience leaned in, captivated. The vulnerability in her voice, the raw emotion in each phrase. These weren't the polished sounds of a practiced performer. They were real, unfiltered, and unforgettable. When the final note lingered in the air, the room remained still, the silence stretching long enough for Anna to catch her breath. Then a single clap, another, and suddenly a thunderous applause erupted. The audience rose to their feet, their cheers and whistles filling the theater. Anna stood motionless, staring at the crowd. They weren't clapping because they felt sorry for her. They weren't clapping out of obligation. They were clapping because they had truly heard her. For the first time, she felt seen. From the side of the stage, Giovanni watched. His hands were trembling, but not from the illness that had weakened him. His face was etched with emotion. He had spent so long pushing Anna away, convinced he was sparing her a burden. But now he saw she had never been burdened. She had been growing into herself. Anna met his gaze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Giovanni nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do the surgery," he said. A sob escaped her as she rushed into his arms, holding him tightly. The years of struggle, the nights spent fighting for just a little more time, they all seemed to dissolve in that moment. She could finally breathe again. The theater owner stepped onto the stage, his face lit with a warm smile. "Thanks to the generosity of this amazing community," he announced, "we've raised enough to cover Giovanni's surgery." The crowd cheered again, the applause swelling, but Anna barely heard it. This moment wasn't just about saving her grandfather's life. It was about everything else that had shifted, the new possibilities, the sense of freedom, the realization that she wasn't alone. As the audience celebrated, Keanu stood in the wings, a faint smile on his face. He knew something transformative had taken place tonight, because sometimes the most profound moments aren't just about surviving. They're about stepping into the person you were always meant to be.